The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting a warm golden glow across the small town nestled in the valley. The streets were still, quiet, with only the soft rustling of autumn leaves and the occasional hum of distant cars breaking the silence. In the corner of a modest backyard, a young boy named Ben crouched beside a small wooden birdhouse, his expression filled with concern. His hands, though small and slightly trembling, were gentle as he cradled a tiny creature. A squirrel, weak and trembling, its fur matted with dirt and tangled leaves, its once vibrant coat dulled by exhaustion. The animal was barely conscious, its fragile body showing the clear signs of hunger and neglect. Ben had discovered the squirrel earlier that morning, while playing near the woods behind his house. As he wandered along the edge of the forest, he had noticed something odd. A small, trembling form curled up beneath the base of an old oak tree. The squirrel's fur was patchy, and it appeared to be struggling to breathe. There was no sign of the usual life and energy a squirrel had. It was simply lying there, looking lost and in pain. His heart went out to it instantly. Something inside him urged him to help, to do whatever he could to save the creature. Ben had seen many animals in the woods before, but none had ever looked so helpless, so desperate. The squirrel's eyes were wide and empty, its chest heaving faintly as it tried to breathe. Ben couldn't leave it there. Gently, he scooped the squirrel up, cradling it against his chest as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. His hands, small but steady, held it as carefully as he could, unwilling to cause it any further pain. Without a second thought, Ben rushed back home, his legs pumping faster as he carried the squirrel. His heart raced with a mixture of fear and hope. As he approached the front door, he looked down at the animal in his hands, and a new surge of determination coursed through him. This squirrel had been through so much already, but Ben wouldn't let it suffer any longer. "Mom!" Ben called, his voice breathless with urgency as he burst through the door. "You have to help me. I found a squirrel and it's really sick. I don't know what to do." His mother, a kind woman with a gentle smile, looked up from her work. She was folding laundry, but when she saw the small, fragile creature in Ben's hands, her expression softened instantly. She set the pile of clothes down and moved quickly toward him, concern written all over her face. "Oh, Ben, you always have a big heart," she said with a sigh, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. She took the squirrel gently from Ben's hands, inspecting it with a frown. "Let's see what we can do for him." They set the squirrel down in a small cardboard box, lining it with soft tissue to make it comfortable. Ben held his breath as his mother carefully gave the animal some water, hoping it would revive. The squirrel barely moved, its chest rising and falling with labored breaths. Its eyes flickered open for just a moment, locking with Ben's as if trying to communicate its gratitude. But it was clear the creature was far too weak to do much else. Ben could hardly bear to watch the poor thing suffer. The thought that it might die from hunger or sickness broke his heart. "Mom, do you think we could take it to the vet?" Ben asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. The words felt like a plea. His mother hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, Ben. We'll do everything we can to help him." The drive to the vet's office felt long and full of worry. Ben's hands gripped the cardboard box tightly, and his heart fluttered with a mix of hope and anxiety. He couldn't stop thinking about the squirrel and whether it would be all right. The thought of losing it made him feel sick inside, but he knew he had to try. He wasn't about to give up. Not yet. When they arrived, the vet's office was surprisingly quiet. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic, mixed with the soft floral scent of cleaning products. Ben could hear the faint sound of birds chirping from a nearby window, but inside everything felt still and tense. Ben sat nervously in one of the chairs, clutching the box close to his chest. He stroked the squirrel's fur gently, as if trying to reassure it that everything would be okay. The sound of a door opening broke the silence, and a young veterinarian stepped into the room. She had soft brown eyes and a calm, welcoming smile. Her name was Dr. Jenna Williams. "Hello there," she greeted Ben, kneeling down to his level. Her hands were steady and practiced as she took the box from his hands. "Let's see what we can do for your little friend." Ben nodded, his eyes fixed on the squirrel as Dr. Williams carefully examined it. Her fingers were gentle but firm as she checked the animal for signs of injury or illness. She murmured quietly to the squirrel, speaking in soothing tones that seemed to calm both the animal and Ben, who was on edge. After a few moments, Dr. Williams looked up at Ben, her face serious. "This little guy is in bad shape," she said. "He's severely malnourished, and there's a high chance he has parasites. His body is very weak, and if we don't act quickly, I'm afraid he won't make it." Ben's stomach dropped at the words. He had known the squirrel was in trouble, but hearing it from the vet made it feel so much more real. His throat tightened, and for a moment he couldn't speak. "Is there anything we can do?" Ben asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Williams hesitated for a moment, then met his gaze. "We can try some emergency treatments, but I need to be honest with you. He's in a very fragile state. Even with the best care, his chances of survival are slim." Ben felt his heart sink even further. The little creature had already fought so hard to survive, but now it seemed as though the odds were stacked against it. The squirrel might not make it, but Ben wasn't ready to give up on him. "Please," Ben said, his voice thick with emotion. "Do everything you can. He deserves a chance." Dr. Williams nodded, her face softening with sympathy. "We'll do our best. I'll give him fluids to rehydrate, some nutrients, and medication for the parasites. But it'll take time, Ben. It's up to him now." Ben watched in awe as Dr. Williams worked, carefully administering fluids and nutrients to the small animal. The squirrel twitched slightly, its chest rising and falling more steadily with each breath. For a moment, Ben allowed himself to believe that there was hope. Perhaps, just maybe, the little squirrel would pull through. After what felt like an eternity, Dr. Williams finished the treatments. She turned to Ben, her face somber. "I've done everything I can for him. Now we just have to wait and see how he responds. His condition is critical, and he needs constant care. I'll keep him here overnight for observation, and we can check back tomorrow." Ben nodded, though he could hardly hold back the tears that threatened to spill. "Thank you, Dr. Williams," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, don't let him die." "I promise," Dr. Williams said softly, her voice filled with reassurance. "We'll do everything we can." The next day seemed to stretch on forever. Ben couldn't focus on anything but the squirrel. He kept replaying the image of the little creature, curled up and weak, in his mind. What if it wasn't enough? What if he hadn't done enough to save it? When they arrived at the vet's office, Dr. Williams greeted them with a kind but serious expression. She led them into a small room where the squirrel lay on a soft bed, its small body still. "I'm afraid I have some difficult news," Dr. Williams said, her voice quiet and filled with empathy. "Despite our best efforts, the squirrel's condition has worsened overnight. His body is just too weak to survive, and we've reached a point where further treatment would only cause him more suffering." Ben felt as if the world had stopped. His heart broke in that instant. He had hoped, he had prayed, but now it was clear that the squirrel's time had run out. He had tried so hard to save it, but sometimes even the most loving care wasn't enough. Dr. Williams looked at Ben with a soft smile. "It's the hardest part of my job, but sometimes we have to make the decision to let go. I can assure you, though, that you gave him the best chance he could have had. Your compassion made a difference." Tears filled Ben's eyes as he stood by the squirrel's side. He gently stroked its fur one last time, his heart heavy with grief. He whispered words of comfort to the animal, even though it couldn't hear him anymore. It wasn't the outcome he had hoped for, but at least the squirrel had known kindness in its final moments. Ben would always remember that, even though it hadn't survived, he had made a difference. "Thank you," Ben said softly, his voice breaking. "Thank you for helping him." Dr. Williams placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did all you could. You gave him the gift of compassion when he needed it most." As Ben left the vet's office, he carried with him the weight of the loss, but also the knowledge that he had tried. The squirrel may not have survived, but it had not died alone. It had felt love, it had been cared for, and in the end, that was all Ben could offer.